Give her a little bit of time. I invite you to rise and speak aloud our affirmation. If you are on Zoom, please keep muted as you speak. The words are printed in the chat line. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship. Now,
So my husband and I, trying to reduce our greenhouse gases, got in 2 new e-bikes, and then I got 2 new crutches. So anyway, it's not to say they're not great, but I hope you can all see me if I sit. I hope you'll forgive me for that. So you've been through weeks of learning about climate change and our impacts, and it can feel overwhelming, kind of terrifying, right? And it can drive people into denial, back into denial, or it can drive them deep into despair. But I think the only path forward is forward to figure out your action. What do you do, both in your personal life and your public life? Now, in some of the other presentations, you've heard of things that you could do in your personal life. Dick White mentioned family size, but judging from the gray hairs in the audience, I think that ship might have sailed for many of us. But let's see, Stephen mentioned the importance of diet, and Mary mentioned overconsumption and not buying stuff you don't really need just because it's brand new and shiny. So there are a lot of things that you know that you can do in your personal life. But Dick White also said he encouraged you to come here for support and then go out into the community. And you might be thinking, to do what exactly? So I'm here to share my journey into finding a calling in the hopes that maybe it will help you find your answer to what your purpose is, what your calling is regarding climate change. You'd heard from my introduction that I've loved nature, and I think your calling starts with things that you've always loved. By the time I was 2nd grade, I loved nature, I was fascinated with teaching, and I wrote to make sense out of my experience. So in hindsight, it seems inevitable that I would become a sustainability consultant and author. The consulting part is I'm told I was a bossy child, so that just shows you that even your most annoying traits can have a place that is useful. It seemed inevitable now, but the journey was totally opaque to me in the process. And I went through 3 phases, and maybe you'll find yourself in one of these phases. My first phase was, I didn't know I needed a calling. My next phase was, I didn't know what my calling was. And then the 3rd phase was, I had a calling, but I couldn't let it take over my life. Okay, so those are the 3 phases, so I'm going to go through each of them. So didn't know I needed a calling. Knowing that now that you know that I love nature, you are going to find it ironic that my first jobs out of college were to work for a timber company that did clear cutting, and then a power company that had 5 coal-fired power plants. So I became this divided self. On the weekends, I would go work with environmental groups and donate to environmental groups, and Monday through Friday, I'd go and work for these companies that clearly didn't exactly share my values. And I couldn't look at it. I couldn't examine that incongruity because I didn't think I could do anything about it. But I discovered that the opposite is true. If you don't look at it, you can't do anything about it. And I was reminded of that many years later when I was consulting with a natural gas company. They wanted me to introduce the idea of sustainability to a large number of their employees. And we were going through the principles of sustainability. And then I asked the audience, So in what ways are you not able to live up to these principles? Everybody looked at their hands. Nobody wanted to look at me. Finally, their corporate attorney raised her hand and said, our product? And I said, yes, you sell greenhouse gases for a living. And I heard these snorts and gasps in the audience. They were horrified that I would say that thing out loud. So I said, you can see from sustainability where the world's headed, and you can either manage that transition or wait for it to be done to you. What do you think you want to do? And suddenly the energy in the room changed. Some people had short-term ideas like, well, we should totally change how we do the parade of homes. That's ridiculous. And other people had longer-term ideas like, we should be leasing fuel cells and providing energy and hot water, and we could take our pipes and send hydrogen to these hydrogen fuel cells. I'm sure these were not new ideas to these people. It just wasn't okay to talk about it and question their business model until some snotty little upstart like me shows up and says, will you sell greenhouse gases for a living? Think about what the life was for these people before that. They'd kiss their kids, send them off to school, and go to work selling greenhouse gases that were going to make their children's life more difficult. There's a spiritual toll to being that divided self, and a productivity toll to organizations if you can't say this stuff out loud. Now, the solution was not to just cut off the gas. That would have hurt lots of people. But now these people started to see, hey, we can be part of the solution. We can be part of the transition, that great turning that Joanna Macy was talking about. So that's the first step, to recognize, okay, you need a calling. The second step for me was finding that calling was the most difficult for me. I went to the library. This was, in the early 90s. I went to the library and gathered up all the books I could find out about climate change. And I would read them until they all started to sound the same. And then I'd pick another topic like drought in the West. And then I'd read that. And then antibiotic resistance. And then species extinction and the fisheries. And of course, I would share all this horrible information with my dear husband, who one time snapped at me, why do you read those terrible books? And I snapped back, because not reading them doesn't make them not true. It was very difficult. I was falling into despair. I was so angry with my species for what we were doing. And I had very difficult moral discussions with myself. What exactly is my justification for staying on this planet if all I'm doing is making it worse? So I desperately needed to figure out what was I going to do about it. And there were two things that I found really useful to figuring that out. The first was to meditate. I'm not a regular meditator, but when I'm in crisis, I find it really helpful. And so I meditated one day on, what is my role? And some voice in my head said, your job is to teach people about sustainability. And I thought, that's obvious. Why didn't I think of that before? But it was like, okay, I don't have to single-handedly stop climate change, but I can take responsibility for making sure people understand what's happening and what they can do about it. I can do that. But once you get that epiphany, you have to validate it and verify it in the larger world. So I started doing informational interviews, and the most impactful one was one that I met with this environmental engineer at one of the largest engineering companies in the country, and I said, here are the things that my business partner and I are good at. We know how to get organizations to change. We know how to facilitate teams. We know how to train people on things that are sort of complicated, make it easy for them to figure out how to apply it. Do you see a place for us where we would be useful? And I fully expected him to kick me out of the office and say, go get a PhD in chemistry or something. But instead he said, oh my gosh, do we need you? He said, to do this work, you have to get an organization to think differently about what business it's in. And then you have to pull all these people together, and pretty soon somebody gets mad, and I don't know what to do. And I went, my business partner and I know all about how to do that. That's no problem. So finally, I knew what I could do. We started integrating sustainability into our consulting practice with all of our clients. And once we got the methods clear, we started writing books so people around the world would be able to follow our practices. My mission kept morphing a little bit. We started a nonprofit for this emerging field of sustainability professionals so they could learn from one another. I worked with teachers and teaching them the principles of sustainability so they could teach their kids. Right now, we're relatively new in Durango, and I'm not exactly sure what my purpose is here yet, but I know it's coming. Oh, and I also wrote a novella for the general public. So did I forget anybody? I think I kind of got everybody. So anyway, so once you know what your calling is, then the next thing you need to do is make sure it doesn't totally take over your life. You probably all know people who are so worried about the future that they make themselves miserable and everybody around them. I used to be one of those people. But it's a horrible way to live, and it's also not a very good way to motivate other people, wandering around telling people all the scary statistics. So I believe once you understand the dynamics of the system you're trying to impact, then you need to close out the steady drumbeat of negative news. I, for example, have had to boycott David Attenborough movies because they all follow the same pattern of here's this amazing little creature and its difficult life and we're smearing it off the planet. I can't go there because it could drive me back into despair. So I focus on what are the intriguing ideas that will lead us someplace exciting, or what are the solutions that people are implementing elsewhere in the world. So that's the focus of the blog that I write every day. So you may have noticed that for me, sustainability is my purpose, demystifying sustainability, and climate change is a really big piece of that, but it's not the whole thing. So for you, maybe climate change is the big thing, or maybe there's something else, like you love photography, or maybe you're a philanthropist, or an investor, or maybe you've got grandkids, or maybe you're an English professor. Whatever those things are for you that you love, there's a way to integrate sustainability and climate change into that. So search for that. Where is that link between what you love to do, what you love, what you care about, what breaks your heart about where the world is going, and figure out what you can do about it. My business partner recently said, aren't we lucky to live in a time when what we do matters so much? Aren't we lucky to live in a time when what we do matters so much? Your calling is calling. You just have to answer.